Welcome to another episode of The Summer of Me. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Nashville, and we are honored and privileged to have a very special guest with us. Nana is in the building, Nitro Nana. If you follow me on Instagram, you've maybe seen her pop up a few times doing chores or breaking things, breaking her body, just doing other things. She's wild now, and we are so lucky to have her. So my mom is a therapist. How many years have you been doing therapy?
Since 2005, so almost 20 years.
20 years. But before that, you were doing social work, and she's always sort of been in this field. And you have a private practice.
Yes.
Anything else you want people to know about you? Happily married?
Yep, happily married, lots of
to
grandbabies.
her fifth husband.
Oh, yes. I thought it was sixth by now.
You've always been a caretaker of
Yes.
some sort, and have dealt with grief and helping people through grief, have dealt with divorce. You've been divorced yourself.
Not 5 times.
Not 5 times, only 4. And have gone through a lot of different things in your life and spoken through, like helped people through those things, but also worked through the stuff yourself.
True.
And if you hear like my mom's patients who show themselves, she doesn't show them, but will say like they love her so much, and she's an amazing therapist. And we are privileged to have her to basically do group therapy is what we're going to call this. So this will be a recurring segment on the podcast. I did a subscription for a long time on Instagram, and we would show up there and just like when we were doing hanging out or whatever and do lives, and people would ask questions. And it was always very, very beneficial. And so I figured we would bring it to the podcast and cover different topics. What would you say your like expertise is in therapy? If somebody were to be like, what kind of therapist are you?
Probably death and dying, grief and loss are my biggest, my most experience in, as well as anxiety, dealing with patients who have anxiety. Mm-hmm. And
you work with kids, how little?
Probably 7 years up.
7 years and up. What's your favorite age to work with?
Oldest patient was 85. Wow. I like they're all ages, but kids teach us a lot about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're fascinating to listen to, and they have so much to teach. The world is so simple for them, and we can learn so much by listening to them. And I think it's really rewarding to change lives at such a young age.
One quick housekeeping note. What's like the disclaimer? Because
this is not considered true therapy. This is not a replacement for therapy. Yeah. This is
you are licensed.
I am a licensed clinical therapist.
Yeah.
These are my opinions.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'll share my opinions today.
Yeah. AKA don't hold us hostage. All right. So first and foremost, I put up a question box on social media and kind of just said like, hey, what are your questions? Like if you had 5 minutes with a therapist, like what's your like number one question you want to ask? And so we were talking about grief today because that was a hot topic. And I know, like you said, you like to talk about grief and help people through grief, but you're also like very interested in the topic in and of itself and have studied it. True. So I'm going to ask you some of the questions that people have asked, and we can kind of elaborate and talk about them.
Okay.
First of all, let's set the stage as far from a therapist's perspective. What is grief, and how would you kind of explain the concept of it? So
grief is, think about it as love. It's the expression of love after someone has passed, and it deals with the emotions and feelings left after loss of any kind. It doesn't have to be actually the death of someone. It can be the death of an idea. It can be the death of a dream. It can be, we can grieve through a lot of different things, but people sometimes don't know to call it that. And so, but it has to do with the emotions and feelings after an experience of loss of some sort.
Got it. And then everybody's probably heard some variation of like, what are the stages of grief, or like I'm in denial or whatever. What's your quick intro of that?
Shock and denial are the common, Kubler and Ross 5 stages of grief, and David Kessler goes through the 6th. So of denial, shock, anger is one, depression, and then slowly we move into acceptance, and then ultimately you hope to find meaning. Mm-hmm. And that's...
which I feel like you see a lot of people doing.
As a grief therapist, a certified grief therapist, that is my goal, is to help people grieve as well as possible and work with that loss as part of their life.
Is there like a time limit on, or
no.
Is it like some people?
So that is a myth that we should hurry up and get over things. And, while there's no one stage you pass through one to another, it's a mixed up ball of yarn, for example. Mm-hmm. You may experience a lot of the stages. Some people don't go through like the anger phase, or the denial phase. Every loss is so different. And
it's interesting. So like, I remember going through my divorce, and obviously like I would talk to my mom a lot, and I had a therapist still and whatnot, but like it just as a parent, not even as a therapist. Right. And like, I remember just like feeling these things, and like you would say like, you're grieving a marriage, or you're grieving the idea of your future, or, you know, you're grieving like losing somebody who you loved, or all these things. And now I can look back and be like, oh, I remember when I was like really angry. I remember being, you know, so upset and so like mad, and then going through like the phases of like, I'm really sad, and then accepting it, and like finding meaning, like, hello, here we are. And I think once you've gone through it, and I still like, there's moments I still experience grief in that. So I don't feel like maybe it ever goes fully away.
Yeah, I think that we have a notion that that we ought to get through something and get past it. You don't get past it. And again, you incorporate it as part of your life, but the goal is to not have those emotions and feelings define you, and for it not to control your life, because there's phases of the grief where it does. And I think healthy grieving really is getting to that place where you're able to incorporate that into your life, and to not get over it. And I think that's what holds people back. I think we in general are a grief illiterate society. And so we don't talk about grief. We don't talk about death and dying well. And a lot of people will say, I just don't know what to say to somebody, like somebody who's sick, or had a loss, or has just been diagnosed with cancer. People don't know what to say.
What would you say to tell them?
And there's people just want their pain witnessed. And you let the person who is experiencing that pain decide whether they want to share it. So even if you know, if somebody, like most people grieving don't want to go to the grocery store because they're afraid they're going to run into somebody there who's going to go, oh, I'm sorry to hear about your wife passing, or whatever. And so they will actually avoid, they'll go to a different town to go to a store.
But wouldn't you say that that's like it, like from somebody like me who said, okay, I'm the person at the grocery store, wouldn't you like, versus like running away from me, what would I say?
So
what would be the better
I would
thing
sort
to
of just say, it's good to see you here. You don't have to always acknowledge it. Let somebody else, I've even suggested to patients, if like I have a person who's maybe lost a spouse and maybe other people don't know. It's like, well, how are you guys doing? We're doing fine. Because maybe he doesn't want to talk about it right now. Yeah. And so what you can always do is you will never go wrong at just saying, hey, I've been thinking about you. Move along, but let them decide if they want to talk to you about it at the grocery store, because they may not even want to get into it. And then you say, hey, it's good to see you. Yeah. You don't let the other person sort of lead whether you say something.
All right. So a couple questions that we got asked. How do you grieve someone that's still here? So whether that's like you've lost somebody, a friendship, or you've lost a divorce, and somebody in a divorce, or you have a child that has grown up and decided they don't want to be part of your life. Like how do you grieve that?
It's hard. It's hard because you don't get as much support for a grief like that. Mm-hmm. And so you can get dismissed pretty easily in that pain. And I think the important thing is to help yourself identify your own feelings, what's going on, get clear about what the expectations were, because that's a lot of what you're grieving is. And change creates a lot of grief for people that they don't know how to talk about. And so I would say go to the grief stages, go to a therapist, and talk about what you're feeling, because your feelings are valid. Mm-hmm. Regardless, you can't help how you feel. And so acknowledging them, and ultimately recognizing you have your own life to live still. You have to find a way to invest. It's usually a sign of something going on for yourself. Yeah. And so reinvesting in your own healing process of acknowledging that pain and that hurt and that loss, and how do I move through it. And so I would read about it. I would look into grief.
Researching, actually grief.
Like grief.com is a fantastic resource for people to go to.
Because then it brings you awareness to what you're going through. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, most people don't realize that that's what they're doing is grieving.
Well, I think we, as a culture, like you said, we're illiterate. Like, you think grief and you think somebody died. Right. You lost a parent, you lost a grandparent, you lost a spouse. Like, exactly. That's it. Like, that's grief kind of, or like you lost a pet, like something is gone forever kind of thing. Right. But I experienced grief. I mean, we experienced grief growing up, right? Like, we had family members that passed away and different situations. But as the first time I really felt grief, like at a very deep place, was through my divorce. Right. Because it was like, oh my God, I've lost everything that I worked so hard to create and, build up. And I had all these ideas and all this stuff. And it was like, it was what sent me on to go on antidepressants, really, because I was like, I can't function. Like, this
Right.
is so sad. And it took me so long to kind of figure out that it was grief that I was going through. I was like, why am I so sad? And so I think it is just like the awareness of like, if I would have known in that time, my therapist at that time was not like a grief therapist, so to speak, or didn't know about it or whatever. But I think if I would have known, like, okay, this is why you want to kill everybody, because you're going through the angry stage of grief.
Well, I think the other part of that is recognizing we do a lot of comparing.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you guys moved, that mm-hmm. I experienced grief through that process, right? That we've talked about. Yeah. But we moved,
we lived 5 minutes from each other,
right.
saw each other every day. We're very close. And I talked about this in the first Summer of Me episode, yeah. But like I needed to move. Are you going to cry?
No.
Oh, I needed to move to kind of
Not yet.
Get for my own, like, it was like my own internal, like, I've got to get out of here and make changes in my life. And I needed to move. And at that point in my life, I was so singularly focused on, like, so it was the Summer of Me. It
right.
was like, I knew I had to get out. And like hindsight, it's been amazing for our relationship and fine. And obviously, like, we miss each other tremendously, but for you on your side of things, you grieved that like severely.
Yes. And so that was hard when you're working with people who have lost a grandchild, for example, yeah. or a daughter. And you're going, well, I still have them. Yeah. It's exactly what the question was, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is, I still grieved. I grieved what mm-hmm. I wanted out of that experience, and I didn't have control. And switching that to, it's not all about me, mm-hmm. to how do I support this person? But also, we do want to compare grief a lot. We don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Your grief is your grief. And when you acknowledge that and you work through that and you start talking to people about it, and again, the right people, a grief therapist is a different sort of experience, right? Mm-hmm. Because they acknowledge loss is loss.
And I know because people will ask, like, where would you find a grief therapist specifically? Like on like a Therapy Today kind of situation, or Psychology Today?
Psychology Today, grief.com. There's a lot of people that go through the grief certification program and that will be listed like, there. Here's therapists in your area, whatnot. Support groups. Mm-hmm. But also, like I say, honoring yourself. And there's a lot of things on grief that you can find online that you can then say, oh yeah, that is what I'm feeling. That is what I'm experiencing. Mm-hmm. You don't always need somebody else to tell it to you, but practice acknowledging it for yourself. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be a huge loss in order to still feel a loss.
Another question we got, how do you discuss grief with children, whether it's an ill family member, deceased parent, a divorce, like kids obviously feel grief severely in a lot of ways. And like, I think that's debilitating for parents. Like, do I tell my kid? Do I not tell my kid? What do I say to them? Do I smooth it over? The dog went to live at a farm. Like, now the dog's dead. Like, how do you talk to them?
So kids, generally speaking, are going to make the story way worse in their head than sometimes it is. And it's there's ages that are going to experience death differently. And even as that child therefore grows. But the rule of thumb is always give them the truth that they can understand at that specific age. Mm-hmm. So if they're asking the question, you answer it honestly for that age level. So you're not going to tell a 5-year-old things that you would tell a 10-year-old, because they won't logically make sense to them. But I am a big proponent of talking to kids openly and honestly. You have a one chance at that, and kids don't forget. Mm-hmm. So
you used to always say, tell the kids nothing but the truth, but only as much as they need to know.
Exactly. You don't need to elaborate. And there's some things they don't need to know, like how are we going to pay the bills? That's an adult question. That's different than mom and dad are getting a divorce or so-and-so has passed away. But I think kids learn how to grieve by watching their family grieve. Mm. So I've worked with patients who lost a parent at 10 years old and have never spoken to anybody about it until their husband died.
Oh, wow.
And all of that grief came up. And so it is sad to watch. People are resilient. Children are by far the most resilient. Mm-hmm. You just got to be able to talk to them. There's our support groups. I used to run a support group for kids whose parents or grandparents had a life-threatening illness. And these kids have really incredible questions, and they are always watching. Mm-hmm. So remember, your kids are listening to things, and then they put it into a story if you're not
filling in the blanks for them.
So like, daddy's at the hospital. Well, why? Mm-hmm. He's sick. Well, I'm sick. What's going to make me?
Am I going to die?
Am I going to die? Or is cancer contagious? Mm-hmm. What is the word sick mean? Explain it to them if they're asking. Some people want to know way more details than other people, which is why you sort of take the lead of the child.
Got it. That makes sense. And then what, as far as like a divorce, I know you walked me through this quite a bit, like going through our divorce with the kids and like, how do I communicate? Mom and dad are like moving into separate houses. And I know like the inclination is like, we're still a family. No, you're not still a family. We're two different families.
Family.
You know, like there's like all these inclinations to just like smooth it over with your kids and just be like, oh, it's going to be fine. Like mom and dad still love each other. No, like they're friends, but they're not like, we're not in love. We're not like a married couple or, you know,
right.
There's so many like differentiating, and we'll have a whole episode on divorce, but I think like just from a surface level, talking about kids with like divorce or separation.
It's a loss for them. It's a loss of their experience. And I think that when we just answer questions without asking where this question's coming from, because a lot of the times the kid is worrying about something, and we'll deal with that one in our divorce segment. But as far as it is a loss for them. And so some parents believe that, you know, because they're happier, that the kid ought to be happier. And the kid is still grieving. Yeah. And if we look at those kind of experiences, are you going to cry now?
No.
Oh, in the experience of grief.
I don't cry. Stone inside.
That they're grieving. They're grieving what they thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
And what we tell them was going to happen. They picked up on things way earlier than a lot of the times. Or if they didn't, like, that's really frightening for a kid. Like, I don't see this coming.
Yeah.
So, and if another quick note, if you're like going through something, and I don't care what it is, and you're sad, for example, and a kid's like, what's wrong? Let them know you're sad. They're not crazy for picking up that something's not okay. They're actually right on, but they're going to write a story about what that something is if you aren't honest and just say, I'm upset with a friend, everything's going to be fine, or daddy and I are, we're not getting along right now, but if it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. But mommy's sad, or you can own just what your feeling is, that I'm going to be okay and we're going to be okay. Because really what they're trying to say is, how do I get okay?
This kind of tags along to our earlier question, but somebody asked this and I thought it was just like a good, very blank statement. Like, how do you accept grief?
You don't. By the way, it's a terrible feeling, right? And so the grief is going to be different for every single person because it also has to do with the relationship. So if somebody, so the acceptance of grief is an interesting word because it's not just a bubble. It's like you're going to go through some phase of this order, right? Of denial or of shock or of like anger or you may do it a little bit, but depending on what that relationship is, the way to get through it and with it is really to be able to identify the feelings that you personally are having with what that grief is. That would be like, how do you get through parenthood? It's obviously very complex. So the reality is to deal with the feelings. Let yourself cry when you need to cry. And if you're really in a grief-stricken spot, a little every single day, you're not gonna, and not rushing it. We don't have to. People's tolerance and empathy for your grief goes away much faster than your grief really does.
Oh, it's so true.
And so you just need a few people in your life, whether it's a therapist or friends, because, by the way, nobody wants to hear it. I do, but nobody wants to hear about your grief.
She loves the dramas.
And it's not drama, by the way. Yeah. That's the point. Yeah. It's not drama. It's friggin' pain. It hurts. It's sad. I know grief intimately. Yeah. And the way through it is to really allow yourself to have that pain, to allow yourself to experience what you're really experiencing.
So the second part of her question, which ties right exactly into what you're saying, is she was like, I lost my father of a heart attack, and I'm just like, I can't seem to get over it. Like I can't seem to like function, like move on.
That would tell me right away, my first thought would be, what are we rushing? Because how long has it been? Did you ever take the opportunity? Some people hold on to things how long is too long? If you're not making what does progress look like? Let me just put it that way. Progress looks like this death does not define you, does not rule your life. It's a part of you. You don't need to get over it.
You're still able to get through it.
You're getting up, you're going to work. Right. And so there's these acute phases of grief where we stop kind of functioning, and then you want to slowly, but I would say really acknowledging, journaling is a fantastic way, getting these emotions and these feelings out. But the other part is, what else is going on in your life? We're not just one dimensional. So you can be grieving. I have a girl that is amazing. She lost her little sister. And I watched her 6 months later be in this play, and she was so vibrant. And I thought, this is death done well. She is grieving over here, and she's living over here. It's the combination. We don't need to stop living because we're grieving, but we also struggle with that because if we're laughing, we think people think we're fine. If I show up at school, people think we're fine. I'm fine. Well, sometimes I don't have an option but to still live, and that is the healthy thing to do.
We had a parent at school that had lost a spouse, and they showed up. I mean, and you even look at like Baylor plays on the baseball team of the school shooting that was here in Nashville, and all these parents showed up like, you know, a week after and had lost like people dear to them from a school shooting, and you're like, how are you even here? And it's like, well, my kid has a baseball game. I don't really have a choice.
What should I do?
Yeah.
And it's what's offensive about that is when they say, well, I couldn't do it. I'd just be in bed. Okay. First of all, that your pain, it's not that you would hurt more than me.
Yeah.
I am still having to show up for my child because I am an amazing parent.
Right.
And I'm doing everything I can to put one foot in front of the other and to not make it normal. But a kid that lost a sibling at that age, for example, that is exactly what many of them want to do is go play baseball.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's exactly what they ought to be doing at that time. And a parent is going to say, I'm still here with you. You still matter. And I'm going to be sobbing my eyes out in my car and, you know, in my closet. And right. And not that the kid shouldn't see somebody crying, but it is very complex. And you never want to say that, like, I can't believe you're doing so well. No, screw you. I'm not doing so well.
You can say fuck you on this podcast.
I was going to, but I didn't. But
you formed your lips.
I know. I thought about it, but that is really the message. By the way, don't mistake in someone showing up and living for them not grieving.
Yeah, such a good point. What would you say if somebody's like, okay, I'm going through grief, I know I'm going through the stages, is there things that you would recommend, like how to cope, or like things that would kind of, whether it's distraction, or I know you covered a few resources, but like, how do I cope with grief? Like, how do I live with it?
So sometimes if grief becomes debilitating, consider an antidepressant, because we don't want to numb your pain because you're going to go through it anyway. But if you really, months and months and months have gone by, by the way, we don't even start bereavement therapy for the first 3 months of a death.
Because something. What's expected in the first 3 months?
You're in that shock a lot of the times. You're still in that denial. You're still bargaining, like, is this really happening? I can't even imagine this. Your body can only take so much grief at a time. It literally helps to protect us. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, you're going to, allowing yourself to have grief pockets, brief times, at 30 minutes a day, I'm going to actually sit down and I'm going to let myself get these emotions and feelings out, or I'm going to journal. I'm going to write letters. I'm going to,
it's where people scream in a pillowcase or like,
or, getting outside can be really, really therapeutic. Fast paced walk outside can be a natural antidepressant. Mm-hmm. So move, get out of your house, get out in fresh air, help, go have coffee with somebody, purpose to distract yourself for a little bit of it, not as a way of trying to cope and never coping with it. Then it's like simultaneously practicing living even when you don't feel like it. Taking walks, go to the mall, go with a friend, journal, listen to happy music. It's, can be really helpful.
Okay, so we talked about the stages of grief. The final stage of grief, in a perfect world, right, is like making meaning out of it. I guess not the final, but
that's one of David Kessler's.
So making meaning out of it. How would you help somebody to make meaning, or what, like, kind of elaborate on, like, what does that mean? How can you help somebody through that, whether it's an adult or a kid?
So I think that the more, once we kind of we're moving into getting kind of back into our living, but I think carrying that person with you. Mm-hmm. So doing, not being afraid to talk about them as if they're still part of our lives. We're sharing, we talk a lot about this with my aunt who passed, and your kids obviously will see a dragonfly. We have symbols that we will say, oh, there's Aunt Robin.
This is actually such a funny story. So my mom is like, you're like very into like a lot of that signs and things like that. And like have done a lot of research on it. And so we always say my Aunt Robin, who was like very close to all of us, passed away from cancer, and my kids were really close to her. And so she would always say, like, I'm going to come back as a dragonfly. Right. And there was a dragonfly when she was dying, like outside of her window and all this stuff. And so the kids, anytime they'll like see a dragonfly and they'll be like, Mom, Aunt Robin's outside. Aunt Robin's in the front yard.
Or
and
she's stuck in your window.
Aunt Robin, no, there was a dragonfly in the trampoline net. And they're like, Aunt Robin's dying again. She's stuck in the trampoline net. But I remember in Memphis and Winnie, or Nora and Winnie, I mean, having a conversation at like, I don't know, 6 and 4 or something like that. And they're like, so what are you going to come back when you're dead? What are you going to be when you're dead? What kind of animal? Yeah. I'm like, I think I'm going to be a dog. Like,
that's what we were walking around the hospice center and your kids were like, Mom, we came back. We all got our death symbols.
Yeah.
What we're going to be.
Like, wow, this is fantastic. Exactly what I want my family to be talking about is
but I think, when they're dead. I think it's really, really helpful to make meaning out of something like that. Mm-hmm. I helped a girl, your friend Christy, die. Mm-hmm. And when afterwards, like her whole message is still with so many people of take them with you on your journey was
when
really
you say
what
help die, like just for people listening, sort of like the idea of a death doula, like how a doula helps bring a baby into the world, and like they're not necessarily the doctor, but they're kind of supporting the person birthing the child, they're supporting the family, like they're just kind of there for all of your needs and to kind of usher this process. Right. You're sort of what we'd call a death doula. And I know some people actually call themselves that.
Yes. So I worked in hospice for a long time and have helped a lot of people die and probably witnessed about 100 deaths myself. It's the greatest gift. But I just remember one of them, her name was Christy, she wanted people to wake up and live. And it really was, take this journey, don't stop living because of your grief, take me with you. And they do. They put stickers all around this whole world of sunflowers. So take your person with you. Remember to, you can put balloons, although that might not be the best thing on Earth Day, but, or paper lanterns, finding ways to honor the person that has passed away, or even, and not as in putting them on a pedestal, but like just having them join. I think that also checking in and realizing that kids, especially, let's say a 6-year-old who lost a parent or a sibling, is going to have a different experience. And then at 8 years old, they're going to all of a sudden have a little more like, oh, wow, this has really been hard. And then at 11, it's like, so they're still growing through their grief, the more aware and understanding they have about that loss. And so continue to talk to them. But when a kid especially is asking questions like this, again, what does it mean to them? Don't assume, like, I work with a family who has a sibling that passed, and the kid will say, I'm really missing my sister. And if the parent were to say, like, I miss her too, you don't miss her the same as he does.
So what would you say to say
I would say, tell me more about what you're missing. What made you think about her today? We're just quick to want to validate, but it is different. And so in a way it discounts, okay, well, if you miss her and I miss her the same, it's different. And by the way.
So would you say like witnessing versus validating, they're different? Yeah,
just being able to, well, he's sharing his pain. We don't have to, I miss her too, says, and we all feel this way.
You hear people do this all the time, like, oh, I went through this. Oh, me too. Oh, right. Yeah. Oh,
it's different. Yeah. Even the loss of a child is different for everybody. You know,
so that's the grief of actually like losing somebody. What about kids? How do you can you make meaning, I guess, out of like a divorce, for example, with grief?
I do think we can. I think that obviously the goal would be to have each parent getting healthy. We can't control that. But what you can do with them is acknowledge, like, here's what's going well in our lives now as well. I mean, it's different than what would have been over here. You don't want to tell them, now you get 2 Christmases, because that discounts what they're, if they're talking about that. But if they need to point out, like, it is true, we have both positives and negatives in our lives. And so teaching them that it's, what's good about what is going on, asking them to help understand, you know, how can this be an okay thing that has happened?
Yeah. Accepting that it doesn't have to be all good.
No, it's never going to be all good for them. Probably.
It's never going to be all good whether your parents are married, divorced.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so it's helping them just to be able to see, usually there's some good. It's an and, not an or. Got it. This happened. This is not fun and good. And this is.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah. And so it's teaching them to live with that sort of mindset in general.
That's our reality.
Yeah. If you're looking for grief resources, grief.com is an amazing place to go. Psychology Today to look for a grief therapist. This will be a recurring segment, so we'll be talking about marriage, divorce, parenting. We have all the things to talk about.
All the fun stuff.
So keep an eye out for question boxes I will put up on my Instagram at Kendra for now. If you want to ask questions, or feel free to send me a direct message there, and I will try to filter through as many of those questions as I can. These are just the specific ones that we got on grief, and our next topic, I think our next episode will be on marriage. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to The Summer of Me. You can listen to episodes on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube. Come hang out and follow my chaos on Instagram at Kendra for now. See you next time.